Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Thursday with our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks, White House reporter Jordan Phelps. And so much of this town right now is fixated on the Justice Department, waiting to see when Bob Mueller's report will come out. You can cut the tension, I think, with a knife. This newsroom behind us is certainly waiting for it. All expectations are now that Bob Mueller will come with this report any day now, Jordan. And we caught a glimpse, you guys, this morning of Bob Mueller headed into the special counsel's office. Really the first time in a few weeks that we've gotten a glimpse of it. AP photographers, well, this is video of our cameraman yesterday. Bob Mueller driving himself to work in a Subaru. Pulling into the garage, and there he is today. AP photographer snapping a close shot of him wearing a ball cap, going incognito. But Jordan, you are seeing new signs from the White House that they are actually getting ready for this anytime now as well.
Yeah, Devin, the White House, like us, are ready to kind of get this out, to sort of get past it. Yeah. They expect that they're going to find out that this report has been transmitted to the DOJ at the same time we do. And once it does, the communications team is ready to go. They've got statements drafted. They're ready to blast that out.
You talked to them today about this. They've got those documents ready.
They are ready to go. And Devin, they want to get it out there so they can move past this. And they aren't ruling out that the president might want to talk to us after it comes out.
All right, so all eyes on that development. We know the president is going to be out and about town today and tomorrow. Meanwhile, you're from Seattle. You know the company Boeing pretty darn well.
Seattle
We won't
expert,
put you on the
Mary
spot.
Alice
You're not our flight expert, but so much of this town, as Congress prepares to head back just in a few days from a recess, is focused on one of the biggest American companies, most successful, profitable, Boeing, the airplane maker, and that very popular, the most popular plane in the sky. You've probably been on one, the 737. This is the 737 MAX model, of course, caught up in that controversy, as ABC News is learning now that the FBI has joined the investigation related to the FAA certification of that. Our David Curley, senior transportation correspondent, of course, following the investigation. David, thanks for coming in. Help us understand this new headline today out of the New York Times that there may now be some new indications that a couple of sensors were missing from these two planes that crashed that Boeing was offering at an extra cost.
So the way it actually works is that there are two sensors that tell the pilot or tell the aircraft whether it is nose up, level, or nose down. And the whole system we've been talking about for a long time here is to prevent a stall when you run out of airspeed and you start to fall out of the sky. It's called MCAS, and it noses down the aircraft. We've known for some time that that system is run off of one sensor on the aircraft. There are actually two, one on each side of the cockpit. They just run it off of one, and it triggered, in the Lion Air crash, the first crash of a MAX, we know that the sensor was bad because it was put in incorrectly by the maintenance crew at Lion Air, sent bad data to the computer, and started that nose-down attitude of the aircraft. So what the headline is today is that Boeing sells as an option, if you want, something that will show you what your angle of attack is in the cockpit on the display, and also a little light that says that there's a disagreement between those two sensors. And if you think that one of them's wrong, that could tell you that, well, wait a minute, it's trying to take me out of a stall with this nose down attitude. My sensors may be wrong.
So is this a bad design? Is this a bad design, David?
The question is whether the first system, having one piece of sensor, one piece of evidence, inducing that MCAS. There's a debate about whether that's a bad design. The question of whether having this data inside the cockpit would have helped these crews, our experts suggest that it probably wouldn't. They didn't follow procedures, that they didn't shut off the system. It looks like, well, Lion Air is almost final report, probably going to be pilot error. There's some suggestions that Ethiopia may be pilot error as well. Now, you ask if it's bad design. Boeing is coming up with a software update, and that MCAS system that would nose down if you're in a stall, it will have 2 points of data. The two sensors will be as part of that, and included will be that little light that says your sensors disagree. So they are making changes to the aircraft in this software update to try and alleviate some of that. And I'll leave it to the experts who know about aircraft design a little better than I do as to whether the first system was bad design. Boeing will tell you no, that it wasn't. I asked them in a briefing 3.5 months ago, this is 1 point failure in this aircraft to cause this dramatic nose down. And they said, oh, no, 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 no. In their fault tree, the one piece of data triggers it But if you have a trained pilot who knows the procedure, they would disengage, shut off the system. Therefore, it's not 1-point failure. Sounds like a bunch of engineering gobbledygook.
Yep.
Gobbledygook. But, you know, they're making changes that will now use both sensors.
David, do you feel like this latest crash will change how Boeing does business, big picture going forward? Their relationship with the FAA, like we've talked so much about, their engineering protocols, their relationship with pilots and pilot training, the unions. What are the big takeaways going to be?
So Boeing told us in that briefing several months ago that it had told the airlines about this system and how it was going to act and the fact that it would be a dramatic move down. And they expected, they say, you know, that the airlines knew them, that they knew this, that they were partners. But the pilots say that they didn't know. So will they be more forthcoming and request training? It's quite possible. This investigation that has been launched now, DOJ, DOT, and Congress as well, it will be interesting. We see these kind of discussions every time there's a major incident like this about, is it too cozy a relationship between the FAA and Boeing? If changes are necessary, I think we'll see them ordered. It's a question of what they find at the end of the certification process. Was there undue pressure on anybody to change something, or did they follow the book? That's what we're going to find out.
And the FBI certainly looking into that now. Congress, when they're back next week, will start those hearings. David Curley, thanks so much. I know you are very busy on that story. Appreciate it, David. Meanwhile, over at the White House today, the president taking action on one of his signature campaign promises, something that is red meat to a lot of conservatives, and that is protecting what he calls conservative free speech on college campuses around the country. Jordan, you've been tracking this today. The president is signing an executive order to allow conservatives, ensure, in his view, conservatives get a fair shot on college campuses.
Yeah, it doesn't apply, obviously, just to conservatives, but that's the aim here, ultimately. So the executive order, there are kind of three main bullet points. The big news here is that it's supposed to increase oversight on these universities to actually enforce free speech rules. And if they do not comply, if they're found not to be in compliance, then they will lose grant money from the federal government. That's number one. Number two, the Department of Education is now supposed to publish more information about the financial risks to students before they make decisions to go to these schools, so they know about the risk of debt and the success rates at these colleges. And number three, it calls for the Department of Education to make more policy recommendations to the president as it relates to making schools more accountable on this issue of reducing debt for students.
With the thought of taking away money from hundreds of colleges and universities, federal money on the basis of some sort of alleged discrimination, is a big deal if they follow through.
It's a huge deal if they follow through, and it would really change the relationship between the government and private institutions and public institutions potentially in the country. But this is not a new debate. There are major conservative PACs and super PACs that have been pushing this administration to take action because they felt like conservative voices were shunned and sometimes totally left out of college campuses. You know, we've seen a few extreme examples of that where very liberal student bodies have protested, certain commentators have put a lot of political pressure on the heads of universities for inviting conservative political commentators. And there's a question on campuses if there's a room for intellectual debate in a robust way. Now, I think there's a lot of more liberals and you know, Democrats or more progressives in the space that'll say this is the president going too far, this is the administration taking an extreme tact, but this will be an ongoing debate, and it has been for a while.
Is this a solution without a problem? Is this more symbolism than substance? That's what we're hearing that debate play out today.
The point, Devin, because we heard from a senior administration official today who was really light on the details. We pressed for details on the enforcement, how this is going to be applied, and they kept referring us to another agency and said they didn't want to get ahead of the implementation of this. But you'd think that on the day that they're rolling out an executive order, they'd have those answers.
Well, let's drill down a little bit. We do have a guest joining us now, Margaret Gotch, editor-in-chief of the Georgetown Voice student newspaper over at Georgetown, just across town. Margaret, thanks so much for joining us. I want to drill down with you a little bit on this whole notion of whether there is a crisis for conservatives on college campuses around the country. What is your view right now from Georgetown's perspective? Is there, in fact, an assault against conservative ideas and conservative voices?
Sure. So Georgetown has a very interesting position in the fact that it is a Catholic university. So the Catholic values that Georgetown promotes plays an interesting role in what kind of speakers are allowed to come to campus and how they are protested or not protested. So to give you an example, a couple of years ago, Cecile Richards, who was the president of Planned Parenthood, came to campus, and she was welcome to come to campus because of Georgetown's free speech policies, but she was heavily protested by conservatives who said that Georgetown should not be promoting or giving her a platform because of its Catholic values. On the same hand, Georgetown also allowed the Georgetown College Republicans to invite Ben Shapiro this year, which was going to be heavily protested. So I'd say at Georgetown, we're a little bit more evenly split between who the university gives benefits to in terms of Catholic groups who then invite who they want versus a generally liberal student body.
And what's your view then in light of today's executive order and the president's assertion that additional protections are needed? From your vantage and talking to students there, do you think this is necessary?
Well, Georgetown, because it's a private institution, is able to make what policies it wants, and then I don't think that the government has much say in that. But from our
they're talking about withholding federal grants, even from private institutions like Georgetown, even research grants, any money that Georgetown receives. They do receive a lot, so they could lord that over them. But I guess what I hear you saying is that you think that the school's policy itself is sufficient.
Right. So I don't think that there is one group that is necessarily favored over another, like is maybe more clear at institutions that take strictly liberal stances with their student body. I think both conservative and liberal groups are given pretty much equal protection at Georgetown, but there's still work to go when it comes to like who receives university benefits and so forth. So I don't think that this is going to change a lot at Georgetown itself, but I definitely see the impact that it could change between the relationship of private institutions, especially, and the government.
Well,
no, just a comment. It would be wild if the administration were to have a moment of backlash against universities for students protesting. And protesting on either side of the aisle feels like a core part of going to college, right? A part of the experience. Free speech and action. That free speech would not just be who you invite on campus to speak, but free speech of the students to voice their opposition to any of those speakers.
Indeed. And Margaret Gatch, thanks so much for your perspective from Georgetown University. Sounds like things are in pretty good shape there for free speech, although we caught up a little bit earlier with a different perspective, a young millennial, Charlie Kirk, who is a conservative leader, founder of Turning Point USA. It's a grassroots group, very active on college campuses around the country, involved in the president's order today. He says, in fact, conservatives are under assault and this order is desperately needed. Take a listen. I want to ask you, so many colleges have free speech policies already in place right now. Why is this executive order so important? Why is it needed?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I firsthand run an organization that is present on 1,400 high school and college campuses across the country. And far too often our students are not given the opportunity of free expression. And myself personally actually experienced this at two universities in particular, DePaul University and Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where Candace Owens and myself were actually not allowed to speak on campus. The university cited security concerns and even issued a statement that our values did not align with the university. And being a private institution, they do have the right under the current laws and structure. However, you can make the argument that as they are receiving federal funding, shouldn't they also have to abide by the First Amendment? And so, yes, some universities do have good speech policies, such as University of Chicago, but those universities are in the minority. And far too often, colleges are siding on the side of the predominant train of thought, which tends to be more on the left, and not allowing all the time speakers such as myself to allow the free flow and marketplace of ideas to exist. So we're thrilled that the president is going to be signing this executive order today to really shine a light, first and foremost, on the issue of free speech on college campuses, but also do something about it and make sure that our college campuses can once again be a marketplace of ideas.
I want to ask you about some criticism that a number of Republican members of Congress have already come out of the gate with. This just in from Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee, who says, in fact, what you just said, we have the First Amendment, we have these constitutional rights, federal courts define and enforce it, he says. Quote, conservatives don't like it when judges try to write the laws. Conservatives should not like it when legislators and agencies try to rewrite the Constitution. He's not a fan of this executive order. What do you say to him?
I'll respectfully disagree with the senator. I agree with him on almost everything. But on this in particular, the executive has the capacity and authority to withhold federal funding that Congress gives them if constitutional rights are not being upheld. So you can make the argument under other constitutional rights. What if due process was not being upheld, which actually was happening at times under the Department of Education under President Obama, where certain people were being accused of activity that was not so great on college campuses, and that's been covered extensively. So when constitutional rights are not being protected by institutions that are receiving taxpayer funding, there is precedent to have the executive step in and have that funding be put in question. And that's exactly what's happening here, is that we have certain constitutional rights, whether it be the right to vote, the right to express yourself, and the right to privacy, that unfortunately have been coming under attack in at some of these universities, in particular the right to free expression. And it's not that you want a particular, this is not a partisan executive order by any means. Both sides are going to have an opportunity to have their voice be heard because of this executive order. And far too often we find the universities and the colleges taking the easy path to silence people such as myself and such as Candace Owens and many other great speakers because they don't want those other ideas to be heard, because it might make their job a little bit harder because there might be protests or there might be more conversation on campus. Our position is this, is the more speech, the better. And unfortunately, college campuses have been going in the opposite direction over the last 20, 30 years.
And President Trump now speaking in the East Room on that executive order, drawing applause there from a number of young conservatives, college students. Let's take a listen.
The university's mission is preparing students for life as citizens in a free society. But even as universities have received billions and billions of dollars from taxpayers, many have become increasingly hostile to free speech and to the First Amendment. You see it all the time. You turn on the news and you see things that are horrible. You see people being punched hard in the face. But he didn't go down. I said, you have a better chin than Muhammad Ali, and he had a And you see the cowbell scene. You saw that horrible scene. That was a disgraceful thing at a school, at a university. Under the guise of speech codes and safe spaces and trigger warnings, these universities have tried to restrict free thought, impose total conformity, and shut down the voices of great young Americans like those here today. It's great people. All of that change is starting right now. We're dealing with billions and billions and billions of dollars.
So the president there talking about this new order withholding, potentially withholding, Mary Alice, federal funding from any college or university that, in his view, under a still yet to be articulated policy guideline, would have that money withheld if they violated a free speech rule. It's interesting because just 1 year ago, the president, in a similar meeting in March 2018 in the East Room with Charlie Kirk, one of the guests we just had on, the president was talking about the crisis of free speech on college campuses. And he said, I would say conservatives have majority support everywhere. I think it's highly overblown. So he's singing a different tune today.
Right, and like I said earlier, this has been an issue for a few key PACs and super PACs in the really far-right kind of conservative space. For example, the Koch brothers and all of their political machinery, they've been pushing this kind of executive order for a long time. They've invested a lot of money and even set up nonprofits to just work on infusing more conservative voices on college campuses. But, you know, I cover campaigns and elections, and I will say this entire conversation conversation reminds me of the fact that there is just a huge generational divide when it comes to politics in this country. And part of the reason, let's be blunt here, the Republicans feel threatened by college campuses is because overwhelmingly college kids vote for Democrats.
They sure do. You'll be spending a lot of time on those campuses as things heat up right
With
now.
all 18.
With all 18.
No, there are 16 right now.
Democratic candidates, maybe soon to be 17 or 18. One of the hot names out there, obviously, we talked about him earlier in the week, is former Vice President Joe Biden, who is certainly inching closer to a run. All indications are that he's likely to announce very soon. And now there is this very interesting report overnight in Axios that Vice President Biden's team, Mary Alice, has been plotting the possibility of packaging his campaign announcement with a running mate announcement at the same time. And the woman that they are flirting with potentially here is Stacey Abrams, the failed Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia.
Right. She has really caught the imagination of so many Democrats. And you'll remember that she did the Democratic response to the President's State of the Union. That was a huge platform for her. You know, like any good politician, we assume that Joe Biden is very aware of his personal weaknesses. And obviously, running in this campaign, in the Democratic primary this year, one of his potential weaknesses is the fact that he's an older, straight white male.
Right.
There are a lot of Democrats that are eager to inject more diversity into the field. So if the former vice president were to go this route, would he be sort of admitting in a way that he needs more diversity, that he wants to reach out to diverse voters, that he wants to bring along more diverse Democrats into a presidential ticket?
The upside could indeed be she could be the yin to his yang, balance it out right out of the gate at a time when, as you say, so many Democrats are looking for some diversity, youthfulness, progressiveness.
There are
a lot of pitfalls. I mean, it's risky. It would be
super
presumptive.
risky.
It would be passing up the entire field of 17 other Democratic candidates who could be good potential VP picks, among other things.
It would be putting both of them under a spotlight for a year and a half. That is just a ton of scrutiny.
Right.
Normally, someone brings on a presidential pick, a running mate, later when they're looking to inject new energy into their ticket. This would be a lot of scrutiny for both of them from the very beginning. It would be incredibly risky. Would it look like pandering?
And what does she think of all this?
Right.
We haven't heard from Stacey Abrams. They did meet recently, we understand.
They did respond with a very diplomatic response, a diplomatic statement to us today. They said that all options are still on the table, so not ruling it out. I have to tell you that I spoke to one of her close friends who actually worked on her campaign. She was just giddy this morning with that news.
The possibility.
Loved the possibility.
Okay, so good for Stacey Abrams. A lot of buzz around her. All eyes on Joe Biden, of course, headed into this home stretch here of the pre-campaign, if you will. Finally, some good news today and a milestone for the former president of the United States, George W. Bush, an avid golfer at age 72. Well, yesterday he notched his first ever hole-in-one. Take a look. He tweeted out a picture here in the 12th hole of Dallas's Trinity Forest Golf Club. It was a par 3, 164-yard shot. I have to say, for hole-in-one club, it's a pretty good thing. Have you ever hit a hole-in-one? Yeah, you're a pretty good golfer, I understand.
Not even close. I don't think I'm a good golfer, but I know enough to know how hard that is to do. That is amazing.
So hats off to George W. Bush for the hole-in-one, and he says in that tweet his next goal is to live to 100 so that he can shoot his age. And I don't think I would ever shoot anything close to 100, more like 200 maybe. I'm a hacker.
My grandma shot her age at 85.
That's good. That's
amazing. That's amazing.
All right, wishing you much luck out there on the golf course if you're on the links this Thursday or headed there this weekend. Great to have you here with us in the briefing room. Great to have Mary Alice here as always. We're back here tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern Time. Download us on the ABC News app. Watch us on abcnews.com. We hope to see you then.